Hello. Games Workshop has had an incredible journey over the past 50 or so years, beginning with three friends who wanted to make games, evolving into a miniatures making mammoth, and then becoming a global institution. There have been many, many people involved in that evolution, but there have always been strong characters who have helped shape the gaming destiny, whether that is in the studios, in the factories, in the stores, or the boardrooms. In many companies, the chief executive officer has the most power in the organization. They set the drive and the ambition and the vision for what that company should become. It ends up reflecting what they think the business should look like. I've actually been lucky enough to spend some time chatting with one such senior leader who joined Games Workshop in the year 2000 and rose to become CEO before ultimately leaving in 2013. He oversaw the Lord of the Rings boom and its subsequent bust. He was there when the internet became an opportunity and a threat, as well as third-party miniature manufacturers, a change to the way that retail stores operated, and a huge series of decisions about what games Games Workshop should actually make. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with former Games Workshop CEO, Mark Wells. Mark, thank you for joining me. I wondered if we might start with just a little bit about how you came to be running Games Workshop in the 2000s.
Well, like a lot of things in life, it was a series of accidents. Probably, I was living in Nottingham, and I was working for Boots, and I'd had a leaving do for someone who'd worked in my team, and I went downtown and we had a few drinks, and I went to the bus stop on Friar Lane at the end of the evening, and someone very healthy kicked in the bus stop window, so it was glass everywhere, and it was chucking it down with rain. It was one of those Nottingham nights where it's just like cats and dogs, and I was getting soaked. So I sort of crossed the street and sheltered in the doorway of this sort of shop on the other side, which I'd never been in, and I was looking in the window waiting for the bus, and I saw these dwarves battling out with Skaven in a subterranean sort of like mine. And I was hooked, completely hooked. And I'd never come across Games Workshop when I was younger, and I was a big sort of like fantasy fan, but I'd not really got into Games Workshop at all. I was more of an Airfix and Tamiya modeler. So that Saturday I went back in. I took my wife Karina, and we went in and I had a look around. And I've been working with Boots. Boots is sort of like a generalist type shop. A lot of people say it's a toy shop for women, and I went into basically a toy shop for me. It was like one of those moments where I thought, "Oh my god, I'm home!" It was just fantastic. And I think the store manager was Nick Christopholi, who's a great guy, and full timer was Darren Latham. And so I met those guys, and there was Chris Harbour was there, and Chris was showing around some Japanese trade accounts, I think, showing them around the store. And I just had a spell with Boots a couple of years earlier working in Japan. So I had a chat with Chris and said, what are you doing? And he says, we're selling our stuff all over the world, which was all news to me. And I said, I did a spell over in Japan and, in Thailand and the Netherlands and things. And he said, you should contact our chief executive. I'm sure he'd like to have a chat with you. And he sort of gave me Chris Prentice's contact details. So I sent Chris an email that night, Saturday night. And on Monday in the office at Boots, I got a message back from Chris saying, do you fancy meeting up this evening? So I toddled over to Lenton and went in to see Chris. It was just such a lovely guy, and we had a good old natter. And he said, do you fancy going for a curry? I said, yeah, okay then. So we went. So I called Chris. I said, I won't be home for supper. I'm going for a curry. So Chris took me for a curry, but it wasn't just Chris and me. He brought a whole bunch of other guys. So there were like 8 guys and me having a curry, which was, I thought, they must do this every Monday night sort of thing. and then got home, and Karina said, so how did it go? I said, just the most fantastic bunch of people, and I'm absolutely, I would love to do something with them sometime. And a few days later, I got another phone call from Chris saying, I really enjoyed seeing you tonight. Fancy coming for another curry? I thought, okay, why not? So I went for another curry. And again, another bunch of guys there who were very different, completely different mix. And I got home and I thought, okay, so that wasn't accidental. And they were obviously having a look at me. And the next day he called me and said, we'd like to offer you a job. And I said, doing what? He says, no idea, but I've ordered the team to get a desk in my office and you're just going to sit in here and just like watch what's going on for a few months and then we'll see what we can do with you. And that's pretty much it. I had a chat with Karina and she loved it too. And actually what was perhaps most important was between those two curries, Chris had sent me the Games Workshop book. And that was the deal clincher for me, because I was really interested in working for a niche business rather than a big conglomerate, big sort of corporate conglomerate. And so the business model really attracted me and I loved the product. But what really sold it for me was the culture. It's the stuff that John Stallard and Robin Hughes were talking about the other day, the values of Games Workshop. A lot of people don't realize it, but having come from a place like Boots, which is an incredibly ethical pharmaceutical, pharmacy business, the values at Games Workshop were way higher. Courage, honesty, humility, the sort of stuff that when you work in a corporation, you are looking for in your managers and the people around you, the integrity that they sort of really push all the time. It's just what I was looking for at that stage of my career. And I just completely bought into the whole culture. So when I joined Chris, I sat in Chris's office for 6 months and there were quite a few issues in the business. And I was just watching and trying not to make a fool of myself. And then Tom Kirby came back in and made a lot of changes and a big management reshuffle. And he sort of looked to me and we'd met a couple of times, but he said, so what am I going to do with you then? And a gap had appeared in the UK sales business. And I said, well, which was, having a few difficulties, a bit of a few issues there. And I said, well, why don't you stick me in the UK and see if I can sort those things out? And so, yeah, he put me in the UK and so the rest is sort of history really, because, the issues were fairly obvious what they were, and they were people issues, really. We'd recruited, we had a really heady growth period in the 90s, and we brought a lot of people in to cope with the growth, and they'd come in from outside and they didn't really understand the business and they didn't buy into the culture. And, the guys who, the core troops, as it were so disillusioned with the team above them that it just needed a right sorting out. So did a clearing of the decks, promoted from within, and we got the momentum going again and got back to what we were good at, really. And so after that, sort of, I was made head of global sales, and then they another restructure, and they sort of gave me the studio as well. And then finally, sort of the wheels came off again a little bit in Games Workshop post Lord of the Rings, it was clear that someone needed to step forward. It was a bit like carrying up the Khyber, volunteers, and everyone else was like hanging back. So I said, okay, if you'd like me to step forward and take over the reins for a while, I'll do that. And that's how I became CEO, really.
Right. Well, I mean, that sounds like the almost ideal way to get a job over curry, right? That's the best kind of interview I could possibly imagine, to be fair. But yeah,
actually, if I'm honest, I think it's really good psychology. I completely buy it, because one of the things I learned coming in, and actually I'd learned it earlier on in my career, but coming to Games Workshop, it really crystallized it for me, which is you really need to recruit people with the right attitude. It's not about the skills, because you can train them on the skills. And by the way, we're very good at training people on how to do things. But you can only train people to do things if they've got the attitude right, if they're really prepared to learn, if they're prepared to, make sacrifices, put the business first, do what they need to do what the business needs. And I think coming into Games Workshop, I was just amazed by the quality of people we had with fantastic attitude and so committed and so good with each other, generally speaking. And the ones who didn't fit that culture stuck out like a sore thumb. So they were relatively easy to identify and to move on. But the ones who got the culture were just, you could uproot trees with them. And it was just such a joy to sort of not only to work in that environment, but then to build it, because obviously everybody we recruited after that, we recruited for attitude, and then we trained them for skills. And so I said to you when you asked, what I chat about my time at Games Workshop, I said it's mainly going to be about the other people, because, when you speak to people like Robin and John, you get a sense of it, don't you? These like giants of the business who really helped like hold the culture together. And as chief executive, when I eventually became chief executive, I really saw my job as being sort of like the personification of that sort of Games Workshop culture, and to really make sure everyone understood it. And what I found was that logistics, we were so good at logistics. The team that ran logistics, Andy and the guys who ran logistics, were doing it better than the big operators. That's how good we were. We looked at outsourcing it, but actually we couldn't find anyone who could do it better than us. And so that's just the quality of people we had at Games Workshop at that stage. And obviously we'll talk shortly about the hobby side and the product design, but it ran all the way through the business. All the way through I could argue that the cleaners at Games Workshop were the best cleaners in the world. It was like a Carlsberg thing. It was just that everybody did things really well. And there was a fantastic chap called Rodney, who was one of our cleaners. Rodney was interested in getting involved in CAD CAM design. Rodney actually became one of our CAD CAM engineers. He was a cleaner at one stage, and he was up for, he had this fantastic positive culture, and he ended up working in the tool room, helping to design the way we sort of made our plastic miniatures. So just shows, what caliber of people we were recruiting and developing.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Was that like an internal training scheme, a sort of apprenticeship scheme, or was that sort of something that you sponsored or supported, or people just developed their own skills and then could find an opportunity to apply them?
Yeah, we very much, because of the problems we'd experienced when I joined. I was a massive risk. Recruiting someone like me was a massive risk, and I think I was just lucky. I was the right guy at the right time, and obviously the 2 curries helped. But I think the point I was making, the point about the curries was that was really smart, because they were starting to work out. Actually, they brought some people in who really weren't getting it, and I did, and so that was and we got much better at it. In fact, we got to the stage where actually we were promoting far more of our people from within, and we very rarely brought people in from outside at a senior level. We'd far rather bring like a trainee accountant to come up through the ranks to end up being a senior accountant. Like Kevin Kevin joined at relatively junior level on the account side. Now he's the chief executive. He grew into that role. And it's the same all the way through the business. So our internal people development was top notch, to the extent that we really didn't need to bring in a lot of expertise from outside, and we never use consultants. I personally have a thing about consultants, because they basically come in, ask you the things that you should be asking your own staff, and then feed back the answers and charge you a fortune for doing so. And you should be doing that yourself. And that's what we did. And so from my point of view, I think the thing that I really enjoyed about coming to Games Workshop was this was a business that was honest enough and humble enough and courageous enough, actually, to plow its own furrow and not listen to other people.
So if that culture and the people who were there and the logistics were like the strengths that you had coming in, what do you think were the sort of key challenges that you were facing as you took over?
Well, I think the key one is what I mentioned earlier. I think we'd recruited some people who didn't fit the culture. And so step one, for example, in the UK, step one was to take those people out of the picture and allow the people who knew what was going on to actually do what they thought was right. So I think, for me, it always starts with the people. We've got this sort of, in the Black Book that, and by the way, the author of the Black Book is Tom Kirby. And I know, lots of people say stuff about Tom Kirby. That Black Book is the best management book I have ever read. It is absolutely fantastic, and I completely subscribe to everything in it. I've done MBAs, Cambridge educated, MBA, the whole lot, been trained by Boots to the nth degree. I can tell you that's the best management book I've ever seen. And the common sense and the practical application of what's in there is just brilliant. And we would put people through, because management is a real and a tough job. And we train people how to manage other people, but we also train people on how to deal with other people, to communicate with other people. So the sort of the behaviors we expected everybody to exhibit in the organization is how you make brilliant miniatures. That sort of like openness to new ideas, that sort of consistency in what you do, that sort of clarity in what you're asking people to do, and firmness at times, which is, it has to be done well. It was just a really, important thing to get right. So it always started with the people, get the culture right, get the people right, get the right people into the right jobs, and then you can deal with the tasks. And so the first thing I found coming in there is we didn't have the right people in the right roles, and we didn't have the right culture. So those are the first two things we sorted out. First in the UK, and then we took it into the other sales businesses. And then we did the same in the studio, and eventually we did the same in the other areas of the business when I became CEO. So always with, culture and people. And the tasks were, really simple, which is I think we had sort of like lost our confidence a little bit, and we were starting to look for growth in areas that we didn't know much about. So we focused back on to basically trying to make the best fantasy miniatures in the world and selling them globally at a profit. That was the mantra: make the best fantasy miniatures in the world and sell them globally at a profit. And that was the business. Anything outside of that was a distraction. So that's really what we had to do. And that clarity was just, that made a huge difference. If you get up in the morning, I mean, you must have found it in your working life. If you get up in the morning, you go to work and you're really clear what you have to do, you've got a half decent chance of doing it. If you go into the office and you're not quite sure, are you making computer games? Are you making board games? Are you whatever? It's just, people don't know what they should be doing. And so getting back to the core business, that niche of making fantasy miniatures, not historical, nothing, fantasy miniatures, the best in the world, and then selling them around the world profitably, was really what we got back to. And yeah, I think there was a slight sort of, I think probably a necessary but quite traumatic sort of period when the Lord of the Rings license became available. And it happened fairly on. It was happening when I was sitting in Chris Prentice's office, actually. That's when the first sniff came in, that the Lord of the Rings miniatures license might be coming up. And I was really supportive of the idea at the time, not because I thought we were going to make squillions of whatever it was, out of Lord of the Rings, but we were having a bit of a wobble as a business. And I think justifiably, I was a bit nervous that someone else might come in and do it and have a go at Games Workshop when we were vulnerable with a big IP, what appeared to be a really big IP. So I was strategically, I was in favor of us doing it. And of course, everyone at Games Workshop wanted to do Lord of the Rings because, it was, LSCO and German, everyone was really excited at the idea of actually doing the Lord of the Rings, because if anyone was going to do it, we felt we should do it because we would do it better than anybody else. If we were going to do Aragorn and the dwarves, whatever, we were going to do it better than anybody else. And so of course, the Perrys just smashed it, just knocked it out of the park, and just did the most incredible job, and formed a fantastic working relationship, by the way, not only with New Line Cinema and the licensing team there, but also obviously, Peter Jackson. And I won't sort of divulge too much of that stuff, but we had a really close working relationship on the design of some of the figures in the films, so we were doing some brilliant stuff there. And it sort of papered over the cracks, quite frankly, of some of the things I talked about earlier. And so what happened is, of course, we had 3 years of just massive sales, because we launched these brilliant miniatures and a good game. The game system was great, really easy to play and really engaging, with this huge goodwill from the films. And I remember going to the opening with most of the UK store managers. We sort of booked a cinema and went along to it. I remember walking out and we had guys in tears, we had guys in tears. They were just so happy of what they saw, from, Fellowship of the Ring. And, of course, the sort of like Two Towers just, was just fantastic. I mean, what great battle scenes for us, and then obviously, Return of the King was great too. But then obviously it fell off a cliff pretty much within about 12 months. And, we tried to keep it going and we did a fantastic job. I mean, I think we were probably arguably one of their top 3 licensees, as an organization. This tiny fantasy miniature maker in, Nottingham was like right up there with the big boys in terms of our licensing, the licensing income we generated for New Line. And but what it papered over really was the fact that we in the sales businesses in particular, we'd stopped growing the hobby. We were simply selling product to people who just came in off their own, off the back of the advertising, as it were. And all the sort of good stuff that John and Robin talked about, on Talking Miniatures, about, teaching people how to collect, paint, and play with, fancy miniatures. The staff were just coping with getting the product out the door. So when the bubble burst, we were overstaffed, we got bloated, we'd forgotten a lot of our core disciplines in sales. And also there was a bit of a gap in our product development line in Warhammer and 40k, because Lord of the Rings have just become so huge, and I think there had been this sort of it had happened before my time. I remember a couple of the experienced guys had been talking quite a lot when I came in about we wanted the third leg of the stool. There was the Warhammer 40k. They'd sort of been looking for the third leg of the stool. Things like Mordheim and so forth. Was that going to be the third leg of the stool? And for a while, we had a third leg, which is Lord of the Rings. But what became really clear was that the Lord of the Rings universe was limited. Because he's died. They weren't writing it anymore. And the great thing about 40k and now obviously Age of Sigmar, but Warhammer as well, was that we could keep expanding the realms. We could keep creating new miniatures, new tanks, the new characters, new storylines, new games, whatever, in those amazing fantasy worlds. There was only so much you could do with the world of Tolkien because it wasn't expanding anymore. And I think that's a realization meant that that was about the time that I had to step up and become chief executive, because we did a massive cut. I mean, I think we reduced our workforce by 33%, globally, wow, which was brutal. And I was responsible for doing quite a lot of that, because obviously a lot of them were in sales, and that was a really painful time. And obviously, our share price reflected it. We took quite a battering, and I think when I took over, it was around just under £2 or something like that. It dropped down quite low, and people were circling, and I think we just needed to actually get back to getting 40k and Warhammer great again, and getting the sales guys doing what they had been doing in the 90s really well, which was bringing people into those hobbies. So yeah, I think it was a regrouping time. And the other thing I would say though is we did learn a lot from Lord of the Rings, because it had been almost like a pressure test, and we learned a lot about making plastics. We learned a huge amount about the part works is really fascinating for us. People like Max Bottrell, who now of course runs the sort of the product development side at Games Workshop and Faction. So for Max, cut his teeth on sort of like the part works, which meant that we gave some young people an opportunity to show us what they could do, and boy, they smashed it. So I was confident we had the people, and with the right focus and direction, we could actually turn it all around. But we had to get back to what we were really good at doing. And I think Lord of the Rings had sort of papered over those cracks for a while, but there was no hiding from it when Lord of the Rings went away.
And it does feel like ultimately that third leg of the stool, like Lord of the Rings does feel like it has become that, right? And it's still there. It's still a system. Obviously, the Hobbit movies supported that and kept it alive. And Games Workshop continued to commit to it even following that sort of the bursting of the bubble, if you like, during that period. But did you find that there was an impact on Warhammer Fantasy as a result of the success and then the wobbles from Lord of the Rings? Did that have a sort of cannibalizing or any other kind of effect on how well Warhammer Fantasy was doing as it moved into its 7th and 8th editions?
No, I think, yeah, when you used to like send me your questions the other day saying we'd like to cover these sort of areas, I mean, it's funny, I never really saw Warhammer as actually going backwards. I just think we just underinvested in it. So I don't think Warhammer got weaker. In fact, quite the reverse. Like 6th edition and so forth. I think were great releases, and I personally, like a lot of hobbyists, I was playing pretty more Warhammer than 40k. I mean, I loved it. I loved playing it. But I think it was just that Lord of the Rings was just a one-off. It was just one of those things that we just had to do. And like I said, it was a defensive move. The fact it became so big was a surprise. And it was almost like we'd almost created a tiger, and we were riding that tiger for a few years, quite rightly, because we had to do it well. We had obligations to New Line to make sure we did a good job, and we did, and an obligation to our hobbyists to do a good job, who were loving it too. But when that bubble burst, I think it was clear to us then we had to get back to the core systems, and I think 40k, I think we're just doing great stuff with 40k as well. I mean, all the way through, 40k was just performing so well, and Lord of the Rings was performing so well, it made Warhammer look slightly anemic. It wasn't that Warhammer was bad, it's just that the others two were just exceptional during that period of time. And I think when Ronnie went into the studio, and Ronnie did Apocalypse, which I loved, and we did a fantastic job with Apocalypse, so 40k had Apocalypse, so it was just great. And we were trying different things with 40k. I mean, we'd had Tony, of course, Tony Cottrell, doing amazing stuff with Forge World. I mean, the big tanks with Forge World were just so exciting. So, and Tony wasn't really doing, rightly, he was focusing on the stuff that was selling. He wasn't really doing much with Warhammer. So Warhammer didn't really have that focus, a Forge World really doing stuff for them. So really, I think it was just 40k had the steroids, and Warhammer didn't. But I think there was a fundamental issue with Warhammer, which is two issues, and we sort of talked about it in your questions that you sent through, which is Warhammer 40k had something that was really unique almost, which was Space Marines. Had Space Marines, and they always, whenever we had a Space Marine release, you could just feel the sort of like the adrenaline rush in the business, in the hobby community, and we didn't really have anything like that in Warhammer. We didn't really have that sort of that thing that just got everybody going. And the second thing was 40k was limitless. There was no limit to that world, that universe. So what the designers could do potentially with 40k was unbounded in a way that Warhammer was perhaps more bounded, and I think that was always, in a sense, a lingering issue for Warhammer that was probably why they were looking for the third leg of the stool. But you can't deny the fact 40k is just great, and everyone loves it. And I think we then realized that I think after a few attempts at getting our own version of the third leg of the stool going, I was starting to realize from the design team that we were executing those sort of specialist games really well, in the sense of, from a design point of view, they were fantastic. But again, they suffered like Warhammer. There was only so much scope for how you could expand that game, and the range of miniatures. And because we always wanted it to be better. I mean, you mentioned Gorka Morka to me, earlier, and everyone got super excited about Gorka Morka. We did a fantastic job with Gorka Morka, but it didn't really go anywhere. And the biggest problem with Gorka Morka was we ordered too much stock. And what we started realizing was, psychologically, if you end up with a warehouse full of unsold boxes, even though the release was great, it felt like a failure. And in the end, it did hurt us, because you have to write off the stock, and everybody hates, churning up plastic or metal or whatever, remelting metal. So, things that actually been a really great launch actually had left us with a sour feeling afterwards. So we started experimenting them with some of these. We went back to some of the sort of boxed games that have been really successful in the past. And we did, I mean, the one that really sort of, I think, nailed it for me was that Blood Bowl. Sorry, it was actually the Space Hulk release.
Right.
When we did that Space Hulk release, and we just did a brilliant job on the miniatures, and we did a brilliant job with all the sort of the Hulk layouts and so forth. The cars were just gorgeous. The box was gorgeous. I think, and we didn't make too much of it. We made a quantity that we knew we would sell out, and so the launch was just bang. It was massive. And Ronnie should have taught me a great lesson. He said there's only two ways to launch a game. It's either on or off. It's either loud or silent. There's only two modes for a launch. And he said, so we got to go loud. And if you go loud, you want to sell out everything. And that Space Hulk release, we sold out everything. We literally sold everything. We had nothing left, which makes everybody excited. It makes the hobbyists excited. It certainly makes the company excited. And then we did the same with Blood Bowl. Did a great again, sold out again. And then we realized actually we don't really need a third leg of the stool. We need to actually keep on injecting these moments of excitement that actually on a regular basis that allow us to put a team of designers together and a team of writers together, and they have some fun, but we don't distract the rest of the studio from the core business of basically constantly evolving 40k and Warhammer. And that was I think I get the impression Games Workshop is really sticking to that lesson now. We keep on releasing really great skirmish type games and box games that are just really fun. They burn brightly, they make everyone excited, and then we've got this fantastic little unit, this sort of Forge World type unit that can support them appropriately afterwards without distracting the core business.
Yeah, and I think you're right that they are continuing to sort of follow that model to a large extent from the looks of things. There's obviously a fine line to walk around getting just the right amount of stock that you satisfy the demand without creating a frustration. And I always wondered what the sort of approach was in the sort of office, if you like. Obviously the designers are coming up with this amazing game. How do you know how many you're going to sell? How do you work out what that right balance is going to be? It must be pretty tough.
It's tough. It's really tough. But I think the other thing one of the things we worked hard on, and like I said, logistics, manufacturing, design studio, and let's not forget management accountants too, people who are crunching the numbers. I think we did a couple of things. We actually brought everything back to Lenton. So we'd opened a plant in we'd opened a warehouse first, and then got some manufacturing in Shanghai. We'd open a factory. We obviously had a big warehousing unit in Memphis, but we also had a manufacturing unit in Memphis, and then we had obviously our core logistics and manufacturing in Lenton. And I think what I realized was that actually getting the designers talking to the tool room, talking to the guys in manufacturing, made a huge difference in our ability to make things well, but make things fast and respond quickly. Whereas if you've got long supply chains and you get your forecast wrong, it's really painful. So bringing it all back to Lenton and making it all in Lenton was core to, I think, us being able to get launches right. So if we got things wrong, we could respond. And that I think was a really good call, because it did a number of things. It not only meant that we made, if we did get things wrong in the forecast, actually we didn't upset too many customers because we could deal with it one way or the other. But it also meant that we learned a huge amount about making plastic miniatures and making them well, and putting things together. Because of course, if you're speaking to someone in the tool room and you're a designer and you're saying, God, I wish I could do this, and they say, well, we could do that. We could just cut the mold line this way, and then that dialogue is so much easier when you're sitting around a table in Bugman's with a coffee than if you've got someone on Zoom call over in Shanghai. So actually, I think closing those operations and bringing them back to the center was core to us actually getting better at well, everything, but one of the things we got better at is managing that tricky, and it is a tricky thing, that tricky thing of forecasting what you need for launch.
Yeah, and I suppose you obviously there's a lot of benefits to taking that kind of approach. There must be a few risks of centralizing everything like that as well, because you then own every aspect of the sort of the risk chain, if you like, I suppose. So that must be an interesting balance to try and accommodate as well.
Yeah, but I think the benefits are, far outweigh that. I think it's one of those things where I'm a massive believer in people, and you put the right people together with a very clear mandate, and you trust them, they will do an incredible job for you, and it's much harder to do that when they're spread all over the world. So and I think when you go to Lenten, you feel it, don't you? You go there and you can just feel that there's that sort of Helen Morley, the old executive secretary, used to call it the pixie dust in the air. There's sort of like pixie dust in the air when you go to Lenten, and there is that sort of like camaraderie, we can do anything, so we can make this work, feeling that you get in Lenten. It's very hard to reproduce that when you're spread geographically. So I just think the benefits far outweigh any risks.
I was going to ask you about so actually you had left the company by the time that Age of Sigmar launched and the end times had happened to the Warhammer world, and it kind of, that Age of Sigmar design very much speaks to the things you were talking about, almost creating a truer mirror of 40k that is limitless and that allows you to have almost your Space Marine like army that brings that excitement. Did any of those conversations that would ultimately lead to the end times and Age of Sigmar, did any of that happen whilst you were still in the company? And if so, what was the direction of travel and the conversations that were being had there?
Yeah, I mean, it had, because obviously the lead times and things like that are long, and things were starting to go really well. We had, we'd picked up some momentum. We were making fantastic miniatures. I think the key thing I'd say is that there were three big things we did at that stage, which were going really well. I suppose the first thing we'd done is that, learning from Lord of the Rings, we then decided that to make the best fantasy miniatures in the world, we really had to make them in plastic. Because remember, a huge amount of the stuff we were making at that stage was metal. And, there was obviously the Forge World stuff, which was in resin, and we were getting better and better at the resin stuff. But fundamentally, as a hobbyist, everybody wanted to have their armies in plastic. And we took the very bold move of actually strategically deciding to make everything in plastic, and that meant retraining the entire studio. So let's not forget, people who were used to sort of sculpting things, with green stuff, actually had to be retrained and voluntarily retrained with new techniques to be able to do stuff that they couldn't do physically, but they could do digitally. And that was a massive investment, like really massive. Not only, you talk about risks, that was a massive investment, not only in terms of like the kits to do it, and obviously the tooling machines to allow us to do it back in the tool room, and obviously the plastic injection molding machines to do it. That was a big capital investment, but also the investment in time and training, and also patience, to make sure that we took everybody with us, and everybody, and to be fair, the designers embraced it wholeheartedly. So that was big, and that had a huge impact on both Warhammer and 40k, in the sense that we could release better miniatures in a material that hobbyists were happier with more variability, because what we could get on the sprue, the density of our sprues we managed to get up to, compared to what we'd done like 5 years earlier, was incredible. We could do it on larger scales, so things like the Bane Blade, in plastic. You could do really big, the Stomper, scenery. You could do that really, we were getting really good at that sort of stuff. And actually what we were finding was that we were struggling with Warhammer to actually get the most out of that ability. We'd created this fantastic culture in sort of like plastic miniature design, and we needed that, we needed to basically free up Warhammer to be able to do more of that. So that was sort of first thing to say. And I think what we realized, I think also, was that it wasn't that we were throwing any less resource at Warhammer. It's just that the scope for Warhammer was just more constrained. And I think when that started becoming clear, then we just had a strategic discussion. We got the key people from the design studio and manufacturing in, and we had a discussion about it. And people like Max were really important at that, and Alan Merritt, really important. And we had a really big discussion, and we sort of took the strategic decision we would have to do, as I said, we'd have to find a way of making the background world infinite, and also the way, well, quite frankly, the way the armies were set up, we'd have to have one army that could actually do something that potentially Space Marines was doing for us in 40k, and that was the brief, and that was pretty much when I left. So that was where we left it, and we also had this sort of mantra. By then we were starting to get really confident in what our people could do. The mantra was, well, whatever they come up with, say, what more can you do? It was never going to be, oh, hold on, I'm not sure, I think you should do that. It was the opposite. It was almost like, okay, yes, and. So both and the whole culture was, yeah, show us what you can do. And you can sort of see that sort of coming through now in some of the miniatures that you're seeing coming out of Age of Sigmar, because what they are doing with some of those miniatures now, particularly the sort of the big figure, how they put them together. I mean, it's just incredible. It's as impressive as what we were able to do with things like, the Baneblade and so forth, but in a different way. And I think that's I think what the idea with Age of Sigmar gave that design studio a chance to do. And, it's early days. We've been doing 40k for how long now? Fundamentally, with Age of Sigmar, you're almost like rebasing and starting again. So you can imagine what they're going to be doing in 10 years' time with Age of Sigmar. So I think it's really exciting. But obviously, the transition was going to be quite a shock. In many ways, it wasn't just the storyline of the end times. For many people, it felt like the end times for Games Workshop. That's like, that's a big change. But I think we knew that we could do it because the business, was in such great shape that we could take a shock like that with that core system and find a way through, because it wasn't going to be perfect. But I was confident Max and the team could make it work, and so it's proven at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah, and there's another technology that sort of runs in parallel to what you were talking about there with the digital sculpting and that move from the physical to the sort of digital space. During your tenure, I think it's probably fair to say that the internet really took hold and kind of became a genuine presence, right? A real place that it moved into everybody's homes and everybody's hands in a way that it hadn't been in the 90s, say. So what was it like trying to wrestle with that, the development of the internet and the sort of increasing presence of the internet, and trying to take advantage of it at the same time as, avoid any of the threats that might come with it as well?
Yeah, I think, well, I suppose when first started becoming aware of the potential impact of the internet, I was pretty much working in sales. So in the early 2000s, I was working in sales. And so everyone was getting very excited about the internet. And I know the Americans were doing some really interesting stuff with their website in America, making it really, sexy and fancy. But I think the way I saw it was, I saw the potential in terms of the web store. So there was a time where we actually divided up the development of the let's say the web, in two ways. It was almost like there was the mechanical web store aspect, which I sort of put my hand up and said I'd drive that, and then there was the engagement with the customer type sort of background world sort of part of the internet, and that another team sort of took that. And so my focus primarily was actually on the web store, because what I realized we could do with the web store was we could make sure that the entire product range was available at the push of a button to everybody. And also with the hobby centers in mind, it meant that we could actually have the entire range available in the hobby center. So a customer could go into the hobby center and we'd have the core range on display. And if they wanted more than we had in stock, they could get it within 48 hours free. sent to the store, or we could send it to their home. So that really excited me. And I think we embraced that very quickly, much quicker than many other retailers. You know, with that integrated offer between the web and the physical, we just were right at the forefront of that. And I think, I think during my time, I think we redid the web store 3 times in my time, because we realized just how critical it was to the hobbyist experience. So that was the first thing. And then in terms of the sort of like the engagement with customers side of it, again, my focus primarily on that was I was really keen for every store to have their own Facebook page. That was the thing I really could see the benefit of. And the reason for that, Jordan, was that one of the things when the wheels started coming off in these like 2007 or so, one of the reasons it was coming off was because we weren't making any money. When the sales dipped after Lord of the Rings, a lot of our hobby centers became unprofitable. So we had just under, I think we had 350 hobby centers then, and a lot of them were underwater. Now, you could argue, and some people would argue, well, it's a necessary investment in growing your hobbyists, that you have a loss-making store, but they're sort of recruiting new hobbyists all the time. I never bought that. I know with Games Workshop, for me, it was always both hands. We wanted both recruit customers and be profitable. And because I just knew that eventually, if we went through a difficult period, the pen pushers would come out and would say, we need to sort of close 250 stores. And for me, that would be the death of recruiting new hobbyists. So we had to find a way of making hobby centers profitable. And this is where this like honesty, humility, and courage comes in, because we sat down and we said, so what is a hobby center trying to do? And as John described it brilliantly the other day when talking about Talking Miniatures, which is hobby centers, basically the guy running a hobby center is basically playing games. They're teaching teenagers typically how to collect, paint, and play with Games Workshop miniatures. The stock is less important than the tables. The gaming tables are where it all happens in the store. And if you do the hobby right, if you do the intro game right, and make them excited about, and the painting table is busy with people painting, you'll sell product. Make it fun, and they will come, and then they will buy, sort of thing. That was the sort of the mantra of the hobby centers. And so we said, so why are we opening all hours that God sends? Because our customers, our teenage boys, they're at school half the day. So why are we opening when, first thing in the morning? Why are we opening shopping centers? Which, you've got to trade from 8 in the morning till 10 at night, when our customers are only going to be in there a fraction of that time. And because if you're in shopping centers and high street locations, you're paying a premium rent, probably overspaced because they're going to give you more space than you need. And you're having to employ lots of staff, and they can't all be great at intro games. So we actually did an experiment. We said, okay, well, let's take some stores. We took 12 stores in the UK that were small enough for us to operate with one man. And it was typically a man, one person who was typically the store manager, because they were often the best person at running an intro game. And we say, okay, so one person in that small store, they can run an intro gaming table for the 3 systems we had then. They can do that. They can run the till as well. And they don't need to open 7 days a week. They can open 5 days a week. So they work a normal 5-day working week. And they'll open later in the day because everyone's at school. And they'll open later at night because people can come after school. And that was sort of the idea of it. And we did a 12-month trial of that, and we worked out how many sales we could lose if there was just, and it would still make us more money than if we had 3 people in the store. And the amazing thing was, actually, we didn't lose any sales. Sales went up by about 20%. So we, reduced the staffing from 3 to 1, and sales went up. And people say, well, what's going to happen when he's ill or goes on holiday? And I said, well, that's where the Facebook account comes in. They have a Facebook account, and he gets all his customers on the Facebook account. And if he's ill, he just posts on Facebook, sorry, guys, I've got the flu. Go online, go to the web store, and I'll see you when I'm feeling better. Or, and we had a couple of situations during the trial where, a store manager was going on holiday for 2 weeks. And the good one said, I'm going on holiday at the end of the month. Get all your stuff now. And we saw this huge spike in sales before he went on holiday. and then a huge spike of sales when he came back. And, if you looked across the period, actually saw sales grow when he was on holiday. So the one-man stores was only possible, really, I think, because of the web store. And having the in-store order point meant that actually the one-man store could run the games. People could order stuff on the web store. He could do it all at the till. And that transformed Games Workshop. So now Games Workshop's got over 600 stores. So instead of closing stores, the opposite happened. 80% of Games Workshop stores are one-man stores. And that transformed the hobby, because you could then drop stores into places that before it would never have been economic to open a store, which meant we just grew a new community of hobbyists in that location, from China to Japan to, Wooga Wooga or whatever in Australia, places, little suburbs that wouldn't have been able to cope with a 3-man store. It would never have made money. They've actually got a really profitable 1-man store, and someone in there who loves running intro games and creating a hobby community. So that was transformational for Games Workshop's fortunes, and is one of the reasons why it's grown so rapidly.
Yeah, and you can definitely see that continued growth, right? And that's the impact has definitely been seen. I imagine in terms of sales and that sort of engagement with the hobby. As someone who sort of grew up in that older world of Games Workshop stores, where you would go and hang out there, and you probably didn't buy that much stuff, but you were there quite a lot. I do wonder what the longer tail of that kind of change is in terms of sort of building a more of a, I guess, an emotional connection with the hobby and the world of Games Workshop and that sort of stuff. Because if you're not spending as much time in its presence, if you like, does that change the way people in the longer term sort of build their relationships with Games Workshop stuff? Impossible, I imagine, to actually answer that question, and we probably wouldn't know for another 10 or 20 or 30 years. But
yeah, I think what my view on it is that almost like if I had a choice, wherever I lived in the world, if I had a choice, I don't get me wrong, I love trade accounts, and the good trade accounts are, as run by keen hobbyists who are really supportive of their hobby community, are just fantastic. But generally speaking, a lot of trade accounts are very happy to sell our product and put it on the shelf and merchandise it well, and give good information to customers and so forth. But if I had a choice between a trade account, generally speaking, and a Games Workshop hobby center, I'd far rather have a Games Workshop hobby center. I'd far rather go in there. You're going to have a better hobby conversation with a member of Games Workshop than you probably are with most trade accounts. And again, don't get me wrong, I'm not negative about trade accounts. And by the way, we have a policy at Games Workshop of really focusing on supporting independent trade accounts. So that's the strategy. We don't sell to chains. We'll sell to anybody, but chains don't like using us because they don't get volume discount.
Right.
So in the end they just drop us, which is fine as far as I'm concerned, because I'd rather be with an independent always. Anyway, if I had a choice between a Games Workshop hobby center and an independent, I'll always go to a Games Workshop hobby center. And yeah, can you hang out like you used to in one of those big old stores with lots of customers? No, but like you said, would you have bought products if you were hanging out?
True.
And of
I'd
course,
already spent my pocket money in the first day, so yeah, it was.
Exactly.
Then the rest of the week was
actually and that's one of the reasons I think we found that the hobby centers just became, the sales actually grew with one-man stores, because the people who came in actually came in to buy something. And they bought something, they went away and they did something, and then they came back in to buy some more, or have a chat about it, or play a game, or try a new system or whatever. So actually the hobby centers were, I would say, much more fit for purpose. And if you want to hang out with people, and talk hobby, the opportunity to do that with the other aspects of online stuff is so much more than it was, isn't it? I mean, when I don't know about you, but there's a whole bunch of Warhammer podcasts I follow, or YouTube channels that I follow now, and I love, it feels like, the tabletop tactics guys, it feels like, they're actually in your living room having a chat with you about the hobby, which is just great, isn't it? So I think to some extent, actually, that aspect of the internet, which I think Games Workshop has really embraced since I left, has been fantastic. Engaging the hobby community with Games Workshop, I think, has been brilliant. Not only in the game development side, but also in the community building side, which to some extent takes the pressure off the hobby center from doing that.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's right. And you're right. It's definitely grown exponentially over the last 10 years or so, hasn't it? And now there are so many different avenues to sort of community space that you probably don't need it in quite the same way you did in the 90s, because you could only engage in it physically in a sort of physical location.
Well, and this is what we're doing now, isn't it? I mean, I think like that's what I love about your show, really, which is that, it's really nice having a chat with someone who knows so much about Games Workshop, and all the people who are logging on to this, and so getting that sort of interaction between sort of Games Workshop people and yourself. I mean, that's just fascinating. And you couldn't really get that quite in the same way if you went to a hobby centre, because you can't get Alessio or Robin Jews or whatever to all those hobby centres. So I think this is where this type of digital media is just brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I was curious about as well was the sort of the third. It's not the third leg of the stool at all. It's maybe the fourth or the fifth or the sixth. It's the kind of role-playing games and board games that Games Workshop used to make, that for a brief period in the sort of 2010 or probably around then, Black Industries was created as a new imprint within Games Workshop to start doing that sort of thing again, and to sort of explore those peripheral products again as a new sort of line. Very quickly, though, that was closed down, and the FFG license, Fantasy Flight Games deal, was done, and they started producing all that sort of stuff. I was just very curious about the sort of timeline that happened there, and that exploration, and how all of that sort of stuff worked out.
Yeah, I mean, like I said to you earlier, we sort of focused back on the core business, and we're starting to get things sorted out. The plastics, the one-man stores, the culture, everything was sort of like, all the key pieces were getting into place and getting the right people in the right roles. It was really, exciting, and so people were quite understandably saying, well, there's these other markets we could go into, because we think we could do a really good job there. So we'd had our fingers burnt back in about 2004 or 5, where we'd had a go at doing a massively multiplayer online game, Warhammer Online, and pretty much all the money we made from Lord of the Rings, we sank into that failed business, really, and that's one of the things that caused us a problem. But actually, it was a really painful and therefore valuable lesson, which is know your limits. Know what you're good at and know what you're not good at. And so we'd been a bit leery about getting involved in computer games after that. And so what we did instead was John Gillard and Andy Jones in particular did a brilliant job about working out how to actually offer IP licenses to people who were making games. And we'd done a couple of deals which had been quite good early on, but then we realized that actually putting all our eggs in one licensee's basket was probably not a good thing. So we started actually then what we call a slice and dice strategy. So we'd slice up bits of our IP, and then we'd offer that bit of IP to a number of different types of licensee. So it might be, massively multiplayer online game, let's say, or whatever. Say who's in the market for massively multiplayer online games? Are any of them really good? And if the really good ones are interested in doing a Warhammer version of that, come and have a chat with us. But we won't give you the whole of Warhammer, or we won't give you the whole of 40k. We'll give you elves versus dwarves or whatever. And that allowed us to test licensees and see what they were good at. And what you'd end up with is the people who really work well with your IP and made a great game using the world of Warhammer or using a bit of 40k, we could then offer more licenses to get a bit more of the universe to those people. And that sort of strategy was starting to evolve at around about the time where we were looking at things like role-playing games and so forth. And of course, what happened was Fantasy Flight came along, and we realized that Fantasy Flight, that is their core business. They do it really well. We would really struggle to make a better game, role-playing game, than Fantasy Flight. And therefore, if they were interested in actually taking our IP and doing a really great license relationship with us with our IP, and doing some fantastic games with that, then actually that would probably be better for the role players out there, because they've got someone who's really good at role-playing using our IP, rather than us going up a very steep learning curve and maybe not ever getting there. And so, we started doing it ourselves, but then we realized that actually this slice and dice licensing model was probably going to end up being better for the role-playing customers and better for us financially. And so that's what we did. And then we built this brilliant licensing team with Andy Jones first, and then John Gillard, and then Eric Morganson, and they just smashed it, just absolutely smashed that. And you've got some fantastic licensed products with some brilliant people, some of which were very small. We gave them a little bit and they just did such a good job. We gave them more and more, and they've ended up being, category killers almost in their particular niche, with our IP, which is just brilliant.
I suppose there's a sort of dark opposite maybe of some of that activity and the sort of the nature of the IPs and the legal stuff there in what we saw with the sort of chapter house stuff that happened throughout the the early 2010s, I think, where there was a lot of legal wrangling around who can create what kind of things that are compatible with Games Workshop products and who owns those IPs and what are people allowed to do. Are you able to talk a little bit about any of that and what the view of that kind of period was like from the boardroom, essentially?
Yeah, it actually is fairly straightforward, really. I mean, we believe someone had infringed our IP, and we wrote to them to say, you're infringing our IP and our trademarks, you can't do that. And they kept on doing it. So we just, we took legal action against them, and that was all it was, really. And it got expensive, but I think you just got to say when you feel someone's done something that's wrong and has hurt you, has done something that's actually infringing your legal right to have, then you've got to take legal action against it. And it was a fairly straightforward decision to do that. Painful decision. We didn't like doing it, but we tried to be nice about it. We tried to sort of like get them to see what we were doing, but at that point they weren't playing ball, so we had to get the lawyers in, and that's just how it is, really. And
it got quite, I suppose, messy. It wasn't as clean cut in the end as probably I imagine GW was hoping for to sort of come out the back end, right? I mean, do you think any of that had an impact on how things then progressed in terms of, say, Age of Sigmar and those kind of developments?
No, I don't think so. I think, if I'm honest, I think one of the things you've got to understand is that, and so I'm a lawyer by the way, by training. So, so the best thing to do in any situation we've got a dispute with someone is sort it out between yourselves, because you don't want to get the lawyers involved. Because if you get the lawyers involved, their job as a law firm is to go for the jugular. That's it. It's almost like the nuclear option to get the lawyers involved. So you really don't want to have to do that unless the other side is being completely unreasonable, because at that point, then we don't really get involved. Then at that point, you get the lawyers in, and their job is to win the IP case. And you get a good firm of lawyers. If you're Games Workshop, we got a good firm of lawyers in, and they just went, they went to town, and that's what their job is. And it's brutal, but that's just how it is. And at the end of the day, whatever the settlement was at the end of the day was the best that those lawyers could get, given the way the court proceedings were going and so forth. And that's just what you do. And I never like doing it. Like I say, I always hate getting experts in from outside, because I'd love to sort it out ourselves. But in that situation, that's what we had to do.
Yeah. From your total time working at GW, I imagine there's some things that would be, okay, maybe if I were to tackle that again, I'd tackle that slightly differently. And then there must be some things where you're like, okay, and I speak in terms of anyone in any career, right? It's going to have those kind of thoughts. Are there any things that you would tackle differently, and any things that you're just super proud of that you're like, this was a great win during that time?
Yeah, I think, I suppose, hindsight is just awful, isn't it? I mean, we all look back on conversations with our families, or things we've done as at school or whatever, and we think, God, if I only hadn't done it that way. And the trouble is, at the time, you don't have the benefit of that. You're dealing with things in front of you, and I can honestly say, we tried to make the best decisions we could at the time. We really did, and by and large, we got some big things right. We also got some things that weren't quite right, and I think being honest, that's just the way it is. Whenever you make a decision, you hope the upside is going to be more than the downside. There will always be a downside, you know, but you just hope that on balance the upside is worth the downside. And that's the best you can hope for, really. And I think generally speaking, like I said, I think we got ourselves into a bit of a hole post Lord of the Rings, and I think my job really was to dig us out of that hole, and I think we did it. And I think the answers were there. You know, the problems were of our own making, and the solutions were of our own making. And it was one of those things, going back to the book, the little Games Workshop book, the thing that was sort of almost like got me into the business was actually what we did. We said, what are we here to do? We're here to make the best fantasy miniatures in the world and sell them globally at a profit. And we just got everyone really clear on that. And I'm really proud of that, because, you know, I did not create Games Workshop. I came in as an outsider. You know, I really embraced it. And I think we went back to that, you know, when things got difficult, we went back to that. And that's where the pixie dust was. And we got the pixie dust working again. And then I think the other thing that I think we got right was, you know, we started with people, you know, so we got the right people in the right. First of all, we recruited the right people. You know, we got people with a great attitude who are really up for learning about the business and doing great things with the business. We also promoted great people who already got the business, really got it, had a great attitude. We promoted them from within, which meant we didn't need many people from outside, because we had enough within, and we grew them internally. So I think that was great. So getting the culture right, getting the people right. A really good example of this is say the studio. So what goes on behind the scenes? So most organizations I've worked for before Games Workshop, you get someone who's really good at something. Let's say a designer. In this case, you know, a miniature designer, really good miniature designer. You pay them more and more because they get really, really good at their job. Okay, and they get to a certain point and they suddenly realize you can't pay them anymore unless they become a manager. And they go from being a great designer, and they think they need to get promoted to be a manager to get more money. And, you know, quite rightly, if they want more money because they've got to have a family to bring up, or, you know, moving house or whatever, so they want more money. So they apply for the management job, and they've been a really great figure designer for you, and you want to pay them more, so you make them the manager of other figure designers. Disaster, absolute disaster, because what they're great at is designing miniatures. And what you really should be doing as an organization is make sure they've got nothing in their way to stop them designing miniatures. And if what's getting in their way is you're not paying them enough to want to keep doing that, pay them more. So one of the things that we did was we made sure there's no cap on the creatives. You know, a creative can be paid, and you know, creators are paid a lot more in many cases than their managers. Okay, so there's no incentive to go out of what you're brilliant at Games Workshop to get more money. And equally, what we realized was, and, you know, I've worked in design, you know, both at Boots and at Next, and then at Games Work. I've worked with creatives, and they're interesting people. That's because, you know, they do exceptional stuff, don't they? And so they're not necessarily the most easy people to get to work together on certain things. I have to say, Games Workshop are some of the best, but they can be quite interesting characters. So who's the best person to manage creatives? Well, it's not another creative. It's actually a good people manager, because they are very important people with very unique skills, and you need a great people manager to manage those people. And so what we started doing, you know, when I came back in sort of 2007 and started, you know, really sort of working with the studio a lot, was actually to sort of make sure we appointed our best people managers to manage our most important teams. So, you know, and it's no accident now you've got Stuart Black running the studio, in effect, because he was one of our best people managers in retail. You know, and a great area manager, great with stores, staff, you know, really good at, you know, understanding people. Obviously, a massive knowledge about the hobby too. But, you know, I remember him when I first went into the UK and going and visiting the stores on the South Coast and going into his store, and he was running a really fantastic store on the South Coast. And I could see what a great guy he was with people. So it's no surprise now he's now, you know, one of those core people managing an amazing team in the studio. And so I think that was the other thing I was really proud of, is that we made it possible for people within the organization with fantastic skills to be the best they could be. And I think the third thing I'm so really proud of is that I think not only did we sort of like get back to what Games Workshop was great at. But we also, made sure we set ourselves ambitious goals. Actually, I think when I became CEO, I think our return on capital was about 13%. Return on capital's, I'm always nervous about metrics, but it's not a bad metric for most organizations. However much money you're putting in, how much do you get out? And our return on the money we were putting into Games Workshop was about 13%, which most businesses would be very happy with. But I was absolutely convinced we could get to 50. I thought we could get a 50% return on capital. And so when I became chief executive, we said, we're going to make the best fancy miniatures in the world and sell them globally at a profit. And we're going to have a return on capital within 5 years of 50%. And, when I finished after 5 years, our return on capital was 58%. And it's even higher now. And it was only possible because of the things we talked about there, the people, getting those people freed up to do what they knew they had to do to make the business even better. And of course, we shared it. We shared the rewards with them. We had this fantastic share save scheme, which is basically you put a bit of your salary aside each month, and that allows you to buy the shares at the price that you started putting the money in. And of course, the hope is that the share price will be higher because you all working together has made the business more valuable. And so when you get a chance to exercise that share save option in the future, hopefully you buy it at the price you started putting the money in. You don't, and then hopefully it's higher. And of course, the share price I think went from about £1.80 up to £7.80 over that time, which meant a lot of people could put a deposit down on a house, and that was for everyone. And by the way, the amount you could put in was the same whether you're the chief executive or whether you're a member of store staff. We had none of these executive bonuses, and one of the things we did was we got rid of executive bonuses because they were bending the business out of shape. Executives in manufacturing were doing things to get a bigger bonus, quite understandably, that might not be in the best interest of the stores, and vice versa. So we got rid of all those sort of executive bonus nonsense, and we just went with something that was across the board share save scheme. A lot of people are now, have got living well, working hard, living well at Games Workshop, because they actually get the rewards for the great work they've done. And then we also, when we scrap bonuses, we put in something called a profit share, which I think is pretty unique actually out there. So the profit share, the idea with the profit share was, in any year, we'll work out how much cash we got in the bank at the end of the year. And we need to have enough cash in the bank to keep the business running for 5 years, basically. So we've got that cash there. That's our safety net for the good times and the bad times. We have a safety net. And then on top of that, whatever we got on top of that, we're going to give back to the shareholders and the staff. And so whenever that surplus cash, as it were, above our safety net gets to a certain amount, we distribute it. And that's why Games Workshop pays such regular dividends, because, when it does well, we pay it out. But also, let's not forget, the staff get a share of that as well. And it depends, I'm not quite sure what they're doing now, but at that time it was 50-50. So 50% went to the shareholders and 50% went to the staff. And with the staff, what it meant was, let's say we had 2,000 staff, that pot was divided by 2,000. So whether you're the chief executive or whether you were filling a shelf in a store, you got a 2,000th of that pot. Okay, so let's say we made a £2 million surplus profit that was going to be shared amongst all the staff, and they'd all get £1,000, which is a lot of money if you're filling shelves. And equally, it was really nice for me as the chief executive to get £1,000 because that meant I could buy more Space Wolves. So, as far as I'm concerned, that was the way we were all in it together. And that meant we all got the same profit share at the end of the day. And I'm really proud that that was the sort of philosophy of Games Workshop, because it recognizes the fact that it's not one person. The last thing it was the chief executive. The chief executive is there basically to help everybody else do the things they need to do. And if you do that, then that's when you start delivering the sort of, the sort of performance that Games Workshop is. I mean, what's the share price today? £110?
It's been, it's rocketed up, hasn't it? And it's been a few periods of quite good performance over the last few years, I think.
It's just fantastic. And that can't be done unless everyone is, you've got the right people doing the right things in the right way. with the right focus, and that's why they deserve the rewards they get.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I find more and more, the more I research Games Workshop and look into that history, is how collaborative an enterprise every aspect of it is, as a business and in terms of creating games, and because you do have all of the different factors that inform how you create a game and what you can produce. Yeah. You've actually moved though from the sort of business world into a far more creative world yourself as well, haven't you, Mark? So I mean, you're now writing stories, sort of like ghost stories, I think, as well, and things like that. What sort of that journey been like?
When I stopped at Games Workshop, I wasn't quite sure what to do next, and I had lots of offers, to work in what I considered competitive businesses, which I just wasn't interested in because I would never do anything against Games Workshop, and so I sort of turned all those down. So I wasn't quite sure what to do next, and Karina said, "Well, you've always wanted to write something. Why don't you write something?" And so I left Games Workshop, I think, in January, and they have a submission. Black Library have a submission window in April. So I was quite interested about. I thought maybe I could write them a short story and just see what I'm like. And I didn't want them to know it was me, because I thought, you've just left. Didn't want anyone to know. I wanted to be judged on the merits of the story. So I created a fictitious pen name, which was the middle name of both my sons. So Nicholas Alexander. So I created this pen name, Nicholas Alexander, and I submitted anonymously, under this pen name, Nicholas Alexander, a short story called The Emperor's Grace, and in that submission window. And lo and behold, it got selected to be published, which is just what I needed, really, to say, was it any good? I just wanted to know, was it any good? And anyway, it got selected to be published, and so a bit of an eye-opener, I think, when they found out who Nicholas Alexander was, because obviously... Anyway, so they published that as a short story ebook, and they asked me to do another one, and I did another one called The Trophy, which again they published, and people seemed to like that. And but then I had found an organisation that I was interested in working for. My old Cambridge college was looking for someone to come in and help them sort a few things out, and I applied to do that, and was a bit surprised when they said yes. So I got offered this posting down to Cambridge to work for my old college in a role. It's called the domestic bursar, which is basically like the chief operating officer of the college, and it's a 365-day a year, 24/7, full-on job. It's one of those things where if anything goes wrong, the person that they call at night is the domestic bursar, and you manage all the staff, all the kitchens, all the accommodation, all the everything you're responsible for. So a really interesting job, and there was a big strategic element to it as well. And it's my old college, and I wanted to give something back. So I had to do that, and it was a really traumatic moment for me, because I think I was working with Lindsay Priestley and Nick Kime, who was like on the Black Library side, and obviously George Mann, who was one of my heroes, as a reader, and they asked, would I be interested in doing a Space Wolf story, and I just couldn't. I had a go at sketching something out for them, and they didn't like it particularly. So it was going to require a lot of work to get something in shape. And I was just about to go into this completely immersive job, and I just said, I'm really sorry, I'm going to hold, if that's okay. So I put the writing on hold for 5 years, and then I finished my stint at the college. And at that point, I thought, I can't really go back to Games Workshop now, because they've written a whole bunch of stuff in the sort of things that we discussed, and I had much better writers than me doing it anyway. So I thought, well, I'll write my own thing, and I wrote a story set in a gothic horror type story set in a Cambridge college, and it became a fantasy bestseller on Amazon, which was nice. And so I kept doing it, and I've written a little trilogy now in that series, which has done well, and I'm working on the next one. So yeah, I've swapped my sort of like 40k and Warhammer sort of like background world for one I'm sort of playing with in Cambridge.
That sounds great. Do you find any of the 40k or the Warhammer influence seeps in anywhere into those stories?
Yeah, I mean, I try and it's interesting because obviously Black Library recently have just done a horror imprint, which
Sure,
is just,
yeah.
it's great. I've really enjoyed it, and yeah, I mean, there's this sort of my series is called Cambridge Gothic, and it has that Gothic feel. It's sort of fairly dark, and so I've got this sort of like book covers on the wall here. So that's College of Shadows. So it has that sort of fairly dark feel, and then got sort of like Gate of Shadows, and there's various other. So yeah, it has that sort of the cover designers I work with. I just say it's Gothic. And it's in the background world of Cambridge, and Cambridge is a bit like a fantasy world. And one of the things I try and make sure is that no one's ever quite sure what's fantasy in the books and what's fiction, what's real, because there's some bizarre stuff that happens in the Cambridge life, and people are saying, do they really do that? And yeah, often they do.
Fantastic. And those are all, you can buy those all on Amazon, I take it now, and have a look at that. Yeah. Fantastic.
We got this nice thing at Christmas, which is so at Christmas we have a lot of students at the colleges who are from overseas and they don't go home at Christmas. So at St John's College, where all my stories are set, St John's College, we have a gathering in the week before Christmas for a ghost story evening. There's a fantastic fellow at John's called Professor Pat Boyd. He organises this. I think he's 83, and he organises this thing, and he's full of energy. He's fantastic. Anyway, when he heard I was starting to do some writing, he said, "Would you fancy writing me a ghost story for one of these ghost story evenings?" And it's held in this long room at St John's College, and the long room there's only candles in there. There's no electricity. So there's this long room, and they get 100 chairs in there, and there's 2 fireplaces, and they're roaring fires going. And between those, they put this little sort of stage, and you get a seat on there, and they calls up 4 ghost story readers to read a story. And anyway, I wrote him a story for that 5 years ago, called "Come Out to Play," and then I performed it that night in their sort of ghost story evening. And yeah, it was great fun, and everyone seemed to like it. So each year since that, I've written him a ghost story and performed them, and I put them in a ghost story collection. So it's not really sort of the main storyline of the books, but it's like it's set in that same world, and that's for free. You can download those stories for free from my website. So yeah, if you're interested to see the style of writing I'm doing, you'll see it has a sort of gothic-y, sort of Warhammery feel, but in a Cambridge context.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love a good Christmas ghost story, like the old BBC series they used to do as well, where they did sort of get Christopher Lee to read them or sort of recreate them and things like that. Yeah, fantastic. There's no better time for a ghost story, even though it's almost Halloween now. I think Christmas is the best ghost story period.
Totally agree with you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time to have a chat with me. I really appreciate you sort of sharing those thoughts, those reflections. It's been great to talk.
Great, and you, Jordan. It's really enjoyed it, and keep up the good work. I love what you're doing, and I'm an avid follower.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it. It was fascinating to get such a different perspective on an incredibly interesting period in Games Workshop's history. So many decisions, so many choices, so many business factors that affected the company and really did make it into what it would become today. So thank you again. If you would like to read some of Mark's writing, I have included a link to his website in the description below. Mark also mentioned the Talking Miniatures book by Robin Dews and John Stallard, a book of interviews with former GW staff. That is an incredible read, really, really interesting. I have, a bit cheekily, put an Amazon affiliate link in the description as well, in case you want to go and buy it and check it out. Whether you use my affiliate link or not, I really think it's worth getting hold of because it's just so interesting. Anyway, I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for watching. I am Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.